I'm joined today by Matthew O'Neill, who is a Biblical Studies Ph.D. student and teacher. He has a master's degree in theology from St. Michael's College, and he's a certified humanist chaplain, also author of What the Bible Really Does and Doesn't Say About Sex, Afterlife. He also writes for the Anthropology blog through the Patheos network. It's so great to have you on. I want to start with sort of at the base level. How far back do ideas of an afterlife go? I mean, we know currently they span many religions in sort of different forms, but how far back can we trace the concept of an afterlife?
The furthest back that we can date, I mean, we can make rough estimates as to probably back dawning around the time that humanity first started speaking and having some form of ability to communicate with one another. But in terms of a tangible form in written form and in stories that we're told, I mean, we have concepts dating back probably as late as 3 to 4 thousand years ago, and probably later too. I mean, I'm sure there's images in archaeology sites that they found instances where there's probably some type of communication around the afterlife. But yeah, I mean, it dates relatively far back.
What are some of the common themes that exist across different cultures, religions, etc., with regard to an afterlife? I mean, are there certain particular characteristics that we can assess that and say these themes seem to regularly come up, or in a plurality of cases come up when a culture or religion hypothesizes about the afterlife?
I mean, I think the only real overwhelmingly continuous theme that goes through all of them is this idea of the continuation of the consciousness or some type of variation of the soul. I mean, for example, if you study Judaism right before the Hellenization, before the Greco-Roman influence came in, there was still this concept that the mind somehow still continued on after the body expired. The earliest ideas that Judaism has in terms of an afterlife just involves the soul, but the soul being or some type of consciousness, but separate from the body, separate from the deity, separate from any sort of even the idea of a punishment or reward system in the afterlife. We have instances of people talking about going to rejoin their ancestors and things like that, but once those other more powerful influences, like the Greco-Roman ones, when Alexander the Great came through and brought that influence through the eastern part of the known world at that point, that's when things started coming about, where there was this idea of a community sort of coming together, early stages of ideas of reward and punishment in the afterlife. So really, the only real consistent thing that we have is just some form of identity or consciousness, a continuation of yourself beyond your earthly body's demise.
I'd love to get into a conversation about sort of what the practical implications would be to life on Earth, right? The present life, if there were an afterlife. And this is not so much a conversation about whether you or anybody else or me or whoever believes that there is an afterlife, but sort of what would be the implications. And we often, when we talk about, at least in the context of right-wing evangelical Christianity and some other extremist elements of religions today, we see that oftentimes a more progressive approach or point of view would say, you know, sometimes the belief in an afterlife in extremist 2016 circles leads to actions that we may not consider that beneficial or positive or good today based on the understanding or belief, rather, that there is an afterlife. I'd love to hear your take on that, right? I mean, what's the best way to start getting into how we assess how a potential afterlife affects how people, the responsibilities and duties and moral obligations people feel today?
Sure. I was sort of thinking about this not too long ago, only like a day or so ago. And what actually led me to sort of thinking about it is, if we talk about things like a very real and scary concept right now is the idea of global warming and the idea of the catastrophes that could come to our planet if we don't start taking more progressive actions towards using more fuel efficient cars, by using renewable energies and things like that. If you think about it in terms of behavior that's exhibited today, I mean, it differs from religion to religion. It differs from sect of each religion to different sect. But if you look at people like the Westboro Baptist Church who go in and protest outside of funerals, who protest outside of other rallies, who say these what we consider really awful things. I mean, they do it because they, from what I understand through admittedly secondhand or sometimes even third-hand sources, that the Westboro Baptist Church really fear that there's going to be this eternal punishment of doom and fire and eternal suffering if they don't do the things that they do. Likewise, our generation, or the people that are certainly more conscious and more forward, I don't want to say forward thinking, but are more proactive in making sure that they are making these healthier choices, that they are using renewable energies and things like that. They're recycling and all that. They're doing it because they fear that if they don't, their children might suffer, that there's going to be all these negative consequences in terms of wildlife, extinctions, water levels rising, and things like that. So I guess I would frame it sort of in that way, where people who are of a more religious mindset, while maybe they personalize it a little bit more, do think that there's going to be some real significant uh, uh, powerful consequences for their behaviors, particularly in the afterlife, if they don't take certain measures here today. And we see that, again, the Westboro Baptist Church. We see it in the more extreme groups like ISIS, who do things like honor killings, where they will execute a member of their family because they have done a certain thing that not only brings shame to them, but shame to their family, shame to their community. So it's almost sort of a parallel type of situation, like what people who, like I said, are more conscious about the global warming situation do.
There are some common themes that we hear, stories that are told in society about so called near death experiences, stories of a so called light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes the fact that we hear similar stories about these incidents from people of different religious faiths, sometimes that's used to sort of point and say, hey, look, there must be something to this if we are hearing similar stories from people with different religious backgrounds. What does science, or what do sort of more empirical or evidence based analyses of these stories that have accumulated over time tell us about a supposed afterlife? Can we draw anything from where those stories often coincide, or can we not?
We can draw certain things from them. They're just not supernatural things that we can draw from them. Um, so, what's really interesting about the near-death experience is you're right. There's a lot of very, very common elements to them. Doesn't matter what part of the world they're from, what sort of religion they grew up in. I mean, the only thing that really differs is maybe some of the types of visions that they see, the people that they might see, if they see a deity or a significant religious figure. Yes, that'll differ from culture to culture, but it has been noted, like you said, that there's a lot of parallels in all these accounts. But we can replicate all of those different situations in scientific experiments, either by accident or not. As one example, the light at the end of the tunnel situation, they've actually been able to replicate that in, interestingly enough, in these machines that they put pilots in to do like test flight simulations before they put them into an actual plane. And what they've discovered is it's the blood draining from the eyes when they start hitting those high altitudes and those very fast velocities, and they can actually prevent that from happening simply by putting goggles over the pilot's eyes. So it's something that, again, they're able to replicate, they're able to understand how it works, and they're able to actually even prevent it simply by doing one small thing, which is put goggles over the eyes. In other situations like the out-of-body experiences, they've been able to replicate that simply by um, putting electrodes in a certain region of the brain. And when they set that off, the clients who have been part of these studies have said, oh gosh, I felt like and I saw myself floating out of my body. Um, so not they're able to replicate all these things, and it's more important to note that a lot of neurologists and a lot of people who are focused and working in this particular area of neurobiology, like Oliver Sacks and even Sam Harris, have noted that these instances where these people experience these things, not only can they be replicated, but they very frequently don't happen when the brain has been turned off, but in fact when it's been turned back on, and your brain becomes hyperactive and it starts picking up all the activity it lacked a moment ago. Um, and it only lasts for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, but the experience just feels much longer, similarly to when we are in our REM sleep cycle and when we have those dreams. I mean, it's not to say our brain shuts off and comes back on, but it's only for a very brief period of time, but we experience it as being much longer. So again, there's a lot we can take away from it. It's just not uh, within the context of anything supernatural.
Well, it is absolutely fascinating, and I know that we are going to get a lot of emails on this issue because so many people, as you say, when they have a personal experience with this, there is really no way to say, hey, here is, or it's difficult often to say, here's the medical or scientific explanation for what happened. These are such deeply personal experiences for so many people. I'll remind everybody, we've been speaking with Matthew O'Neill, who is a biblical studies PhD student and teacher. He has a master's in theology from St. Michael's College, is a certified humanist chaplain, and is also author of the books What the Bible Really Does and Doesn't Say About Sex and the book Afterlife. Matthew, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.